I knew the Alpha King had seen the bruises the moment his eyes stopped on my wrist. Not my face. Not the silver tray trembling in my hands. My wrist. The sleeve of my white serving jacket had slipped back when I reached to refill his glass. And for one terrible second, the purple-black marks around my skin were exposed beneath the chandelier light, like fingerprints left by a ghost that had never learned how to let go. I yanked the fabric down so fast the crystal pitcher knocked against the rim of his goblet. Water spilled over my fingers, cold and clean, running straight across the place where the bruises burned. "I'm sorry," I whispered before he said anything. The words came out by instinct. They always did. Around us, the banquet continued pretending to be beautiful. Gold plates, white roses, music soft enough to hide the sound of men deciding other people's futures. I kept my head bowed because servants did not stare at kings, and damaged things did not invite attention. Especially not from him. The Alpha King sat at the center of the long table, still as a blade in its sheath. I had heard his voice only once before that night, when he had entered the hall, and every Alpha in the room lowered their eyes without being asked. He did not need to raise his hand to command silence. He carried silence with him. That was why my stomach twisted so hard I almost dropped the tray. If he had seen, then someone else might have seen him seeing. And if someone else noticed, then by morning there would be questions. Questions always led back to punishment. "Your hand," he said. His voice was low, controlled, nothing like the sharp voices I was used to. Still, my body reacted before my mind could. My fingers curled under the tray. My shoulders folded inward. I made myself smaller, neater, less offensive. "It's nothing, Your Majesty." That was the first rule. Nothing happened. The second rule: if something happened, it was an accident. The third rule: if the accident had a name, that name was mine. I was careless, I added quickly. The cellar door caught me. The lie was ready. Smooth. Familiar. I had said it to the laundry master, to the kitchen matron, to the healer who once looked at the yellowing mark near my collarbone, and then looked away because looking longer would have required courage. The Alpha King's gaze did not move away. That was the first thing that frightened me. People always looked away. Some did it from discomfort. Some from loyalty. Some because my bruises were not powerful enough to be called evidence unless a powerful person decided they mattered. But the king looked at my sleeve as if the cloth itself had offended him. "A cellar door did that?" he asked. I nodded too fast. "Yes." His eyes lifted to mine. They were not cruel, but that almost made it worse. Cruelty, I understood. Cruelty had rules. Cruelty made bargains. Kindness was unstable. It could turn into pity, and pity could turn into anger, and anger could turn back on the person who had caused the inconvenience. "I'm fine," I said, even though he had not asked. Another mistake. His attention sharpened. Behind my ribs, panic opened its mouth. At the far end of the hall, near the carved doors, I saw the steward watching me. Not openly. He never watched openly. He only tilted his head a little, enough to remind me that the palace had eyes long before the king entered it. My hand tightened on the tray until the silver edge bit into my palm. The pain helped. Pain was simple. Pain had an answer. Be better. Stand straighter. Speak less. Do not spill. Do not make them regret keeping you. The Alpha King followed my glance. The steward's expression changed for half a heartbeat, then smoothed into obedience. A tiny thing. Barely anything. But the king saw that too. I wished, suddenly and desperately, that I had broken the pitcher. A mess would have been easier than this silence. A mess could be cleaned. A bruise could not be unseen. "Leave us," the king said. 2 words, quiet as falling snow. The music seemed to shrink around them. The nobles nearest him went still. The steward stepped forward, mouth opening, but the king did not even look at him. Everyone. Chairs scraped. Silk whispered. Servants fled with practiced grace. I remained frozen beside his chair because no one had told me whether I was part of everyone or the mistake that had caused everyone to leave. When the doors closed, the hall became too large. Too bright. Too empty. My breathing sounded disrespectful. "Please," I said. I hated how small the word was. "I didn't mean to disturb you." The king rose. Slowly. Not to threaten me, though my body did not know the difference. He was taller than I had realized, his shadow falling across the spilled water on the table, across my covered wrist, across the white sleeve that had failed me. I stepped back. He stopped immediately. That stopped me too. No one stopped because I was afraid. They stopped when they were finished. "I am not going to touch you," he said. The words landed strangely, like a door unlocking somewhere I had forgotten a door existed. My throat tightened. I stared at the floor, at the reflection of the chandeliers trembling in the spilled water. It was my fault, I said again, because the silence demanded payment, and that was the only coin I had ever been allowed to use. I should have been more careful. I shouldn't have reached that way. I know better. The king said nothing for so long that I risked looking up. His face had changed. Not with disgust. Not even with pity. Something colder. Something that made the air feel dangerous for anyone who had ever put their hands on me. His gaze dropped once more to the sleeve I was crushing in my fist. "Show me," he said softly. My blood went cold. "I can't." "Because you are afraid of me?" I shook my head before I could stop myself. The truth slipped out in the smallest breath. "Because they'll know." His eyes darkened. Outside the closed doors, footsteps passed and paused. The steward, maybe. Someone listening. Someone already counting how much I had ruined. I pulled my sleeve lower until the fabric stretched. "Please don't ask," I whispered. "Please. I deserved it." The king went completely still. Then he stepped closer, not enough to touch, only enough that his voice reached me without echo. "Who?" he asked, each word quiet and terrible. "Told you this was your fault." The door handle moved before I could answer him. Not opened, just turned once, slowly, until the latch caught with a soft click that sounded louder than the music had. My whole body forgot how to breathe. The Alpha King heard it too. His eyes left my face and went to the doors. "I said everyone," he called. His voice was calm, but the air changed around it, tightening until even the chandeliers seemed afraid to swing. There was a pause on the other side. Then the steward's voice came through the wood, smooth as polished bone. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. The servant is required below. He has duties remaining." Duties? My fingers went numb around the tray. That was what they called it when a mistake needed to be corrected somewhere no guest could see. Duties remaining. Lessons unfinished. Hands washed in cold water until they stopped shaking. Knees on stone. Silence until morning. I did not realize I had taken a step toward the door until the king's hand lifted. Not touching me. Not blocking me. Just rising slightly between me and the sound. I froze anyway. The steward had not entered, but he had still reached me. That was the worst part. He did not need a room to hold me. "Your duties are finished," the king said. "They are not," I whispered before I could stop myself. His gaze returned to me, sharp and unreadable. I looked down, shame rushing hot into my face. I haven't cleared the west table. The dessert service hasn't been reset. If the cups are left out, the sugar hardens in the rims, and if the sugar hardens, I stopped because I heard myself. I heard how fast the words came. How exact. How practiced. The king heard it too. His expression shifted, not with impatience, but with something darker. "And if the sugar hardens?" he asked. My throat closed. There were rules for answering questions. Never pause too long. Never sound defensive. Never make the person asking feel cruel. "Then it's my fault," I said. The words slipped out cleanly, like a knife already sharpened. Outside the doors, the steward made no sound, but I knew he was smiling. The king stepped away from me then, and for 1/6 second I thought he had decided I was too much trouble. Instead, he walked to the doors himself. I nearly dropped the tray. No king opened doors for servants. No king crossed a banquet hall because a steward had spoken too softly. But he did. He pulled the door open just enough for the light from the hall to cut across the steward's shoes. I could not see the steward's face from where I stood, only his gloved hands folded neatly at his waist. In one of them was a small black card. My stomach fell through the floor. The card had a red string tied through one corner. An incident mark. I had seen them before. One for a broken glass. One for a misplaced key. One for bleeding through a sleeve during winter service because I had not wrapped the bruise tightly enough. 3 marks in a month meant private correction. I already had 2. The king looked down at the card. "What is that?" The steward answered without hesitation. "A household record, Your Majesty. Nothing that need concern the throne." I wanted to beg him not to say more. I wanted to step forward and take the card, to smile, to make this normal before the king understood enough to make it dangerous. But my feet would not move. The king held out his hand. The steward hesitated. That tiny hesitation was the first honest thing he had done all night. Then the card passed into the king's fingers. He read it. I watched his jaw tighten. Not much. Barely enough for anyone else to notice. But I had spent years surviving by reading the smallest changes in powerful men. The card was not blank. It never was. "Spilled water at royal table." The king read aloud. "Improper posture. Failure to answer immediately. Suspicious conduct. Each charge landed inside me like a stone dropped into deep water. I had done those things. Hadn't I? I had spilled the water. I had stepped back. I had failed to answer. Suspicious conduct sounded dramatic, but maybe pulling my sleeve down had made it worse. Maybe if I had stood still, none of this would have happened. Maybe if I had been better, quieter, cleaner, no one would be standing in a ruined banquet hall reading proof that I was exactly what they said I was. It's accurate, I said. The king looked at me. Is it? I nodded because the steward was there, because the card was there, because my bruises were under my sleeve and the truth was too large to survive in a room this bright. I caused a disturbance. The steward's shoes shifted. A warning without words. I upset the service. I made His Majesty uncomfortable. I should be corrected. The last sentence came out before I could catch it. The king went very still. The steward did too. For one terrible heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the king turned fully toward me, the black card held between two fingers as if it were something filthy. Who wrote this? He asked. I knew the answer. Everyone knew the answer. But my mouth had been trained around silence until truth felt like disobedience. The household keeps records, I said. That is not what I asked. My hand began to shake again. The tray rattled. The sound made me flinch so hard the king's eyes dropped to my sleeve. I saw the question return to his face, sharper now. Not just who hurt you. Who taught you to help them hide it? The steward finally spoke, and for the first time his smooth voice carried a thread of panic. Your Majesty, servants in delicate conditions often exaggerate discomfort to avoid discipline. Compassion is admirable, but indulgence can encourage manipulation. Manipulation. The word struck me harder than any hand. I knew that one too. It was what they called crying, what they called shaking, what they called begging someone to stop. The king looked at the steward, and the hall seemed to lose temperature. Leave the card, he said, and leave the door. Your Majesty, now. The steward bowed. I heard his footsteps retreat, slow enough to promise this was not over. When the door closed again, the king did not move toward me. He placed the black card on the table between us, beside the spilled water and the untouched goblet. Evidence. A small, ugly thing with my failure written in another man's hand. You believed every word on that card, he said. It was not an accusation. That made it worse. My chest hurt. It's easier when I do. His eyes softened just enough to frighten me. Easier than what? I stared at the red string tied to the card. My voice dropped so low I barely heard myself. Then making them prove it. The silence after that was different. It was not empty. It was full of something waking up. The king looked from the card to my sleeve, then back to my face, and I knew he had found the edge of a door I had spent years keeping locked. He did not ask me to show him the bruises again. He asked something worse. How many cards are there? My stomach turned to ice. Because that was the first question no one had ever asked. And because the answer was not 3. It was not 10. It was enough to fill a drawer below stairs, tied in red string, waiting for someone powerful enough to call them what they were. The king did not ask again how many cards there were. He rang the silver bell at the end of the table once, and the sound cut through the empty banquet hall like a blade across glass. I flinched so hard the tray slipped from my hands. It hit the carpet with a dull, harmless thud, but my body reacted as if it had shattered. I dropped to my knees before I remembered the king had not ordered me to. The black card blurred on the table above me, its red string bright as a warning. The doors opened at once. Not the steward this time. 2 royal guards stepped inside, hands resting near their swords, eyes moving from me on the floor to the king standing over the incident card. One of them stiffened. Maybe he thought I had attacked his king. Maybe he thought the king had found me exactly where servants belonged. Bring me the household correction records, the king said. My breath stopped. The taller guard hesitated. Your Majesty, those are kept below. Then go below. The steward controls that archive. The king's gaze sharpened. Not anymore. The guards left, and the doors shut again. That should have made me feel safer. Instead, every inch of my skin began to crawl. No one went below without permission. Below was where the palace stopped shining. Below was where linen was boiled, knives were counted, and mistakes were made quiet. I pushed myself up too fast, dizzy from panic. Please don't, I said. If you take the records, they'll know I caused this. The king looked at me, then at the tray on the floor. Slowly, deliberately, he bent and picked it up himself. A king, lifting a servant's tray. The wrongness of it made my throat ache. He set it on the table. Instead of handing it back to me. You did not cause this. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. You don't understand. Then help me understand. The gentleness in his voice made the words more dangerous than a command. I shook my head. Understanding doesn't change what happens after. Before he could answer, the doors opened again. The guards returned carrying a narrow wooden drawer between them. Its brass handle was scratched from use, and red string hung from the seams like dried veins. Behind them came the steward, pale now, but still perfect. Your Majesty, he said, bowing deeply. Those are internal management documents. Many contain sensitive household matters. The king did not look away from the drawer. Open it. The steward's mouth tightened. For the first time since I had known him, he looked less like a man and more like a door about to break. One guard set the drawer on the banquet table. The other unlocked it with a key the steward had not offered. Cards spilled forward in tight bundles, each tied in red. There were so many that the sound of them shifting made my knees weaken. I knew there were many. I had imagined many. But seeing them together was different. Seeing years of my failures stacked neatly beneath the chandelier light made them feel official. Permanent. True. The king untied the first bundle. Dropped linen. Failed to answer kitchen summons. Improper scent suppression. Visible distress during service. He looked at me. How old were you? I stared at the card. The corner had been bent. I remembered that one. My first winter in the palace. I had been so cold my hands would not stop shaking, and the soup bowls had rattled on the tray. 17, I whispered. The steward said, young servants require structure. The king turned one page of cards over. His face hardened. This one says correction administered for crying. Heat rushed into my face. I wished the floor would split open. I disturbed the corridor. You were crying. I was too loud. The king's eyes flashed to the steward. And this? He lifted another card. I did not need to see it to know. I remembered red string. I remembered. Cold tile. I remembered being told not to stain the cuffs. Bruising observed on left wrist. The king read. Explanation accepted. Careless handling of cellar crates. He picked up another. Bruising observed near collarbone. Explanation accepted. Fall on stairs. Another. Finger marks observed. Explanation accepted. Panic episode during training. The room tilted. I had told those lies one at a time. I had survived them one at a time. But here they were together, no longer separate accidents, no longer small enough to swallow. They lined up like witnesses. The king looked at my covered wrist. Then he looked at the dates. These injuries appeared after corrections. The steward's breath caught. Not much, but enough. The king heard it. So did I? A horrible thought opened inside me, slow and cold. The cards had never been proof that I deserved correction. They were proof that the correction left marks, and someone had written down the lies that covered them. My hand went to my sleeve before I could stop it. The king noticed, and for the first time, he moved between me and the steward. Not dramatically, just one step. But the air changed. The steward could still see me, but he could no longer own the space around me. Take him out, the king said. The guard seized the steward's arms. His mask cracked at the edges. Your Majesty, you are being deceived. He is unstable. He bruises easily. He is always bruised easily. My stomach dropped, because those were the words. The ones used whenever someone looked too long. I bruise easily. I cry easily. I misunderstand discipline. I make kind people look cruel. The steward was dragged toward the doors, but his eyes found mine, flat and bright with promise. Tell him the truth, he said softly. Tell him how many chances we gave you. My mouth opened. No sound came out. Then a final bundle slipped from the drawer and scattered across the wet table. The newest card slid to the edge and stopped against the king's untouched goblet. I saw the red string first, then the date. Tonight's date. My name was already written at the top. The charge was already filled in before the banquet had even ended. Visible marks exposed before. Royal guest, the king read, his voice gone quiet in a way that made the guards stop moving. Beneath it, in the steward's precise handwriting, was the correction order scheduled for midnight. Isolation. No service. No witnesses. And at the bottom, one line that made the room disappear around me. If questioned, servant will confess self-inflicted injury. The king did not let the guards drag the steward far before the palace answered back. A bell rang somewhere below us, low and iron. Not the silver sound the king had used, but the warning bell from the servants' corridor. Once, twice, 3 times. My blood knew that sound before my mind did. Emergency disorder. All household staff returned below. All unfinished duties reviewed. All corrected servants accounted for. The newest card lay on the table between us, still wet at the corner from the spilled water, still carrying the sentence that had been prepared for me before I even made a mistake. If questioned, servant will confess self-inflicted injury. The king stared at that line, and for 1 second I thought his anger alone might burn the ink off the paper. Then the bell rang again, and I moved. Not toward him, toward the doors. Where are you going? He asked. Below. My voice sounded strange, flat, almost calm. Panic did that sometimes. It made the impossible feel like a schedule I had to keep. If I don't report, they'll mark me absent. If they mark me absent, they'll check my room. If they check my room, they'll find. I stopped too late. The king's eyes narrowed. Find what? I pressed my lips together. The bell rang a 5th time. Each note felt like a hand closing around the back of my neck. The guards had taken the steward, but the steward had not taken the system with him. It was still alive beneath the floors, in the bells, in the records, in everyone who knew exactly where to stand when someone like me was being punished. The king stepped between me and the doors again, but not close enough to trap me. You are not going below. Then someone else will pay for me. The words tore out sharper than I meant them to. I saw one of the guards glance at the king, startled, but I could not stop. You think taking him away fixes it? It doesn't. If I miss accounting, the laundry boys lose sleep rations. If I leave my station uncleared, the kitchen maids scrub until dawn. If the card is not signed by midnight, they will choose someone else to stand in my place and call it discipline. The king's face changed. Not because he doubted me. Because he believed me too quickly. That was worse. Belief made everything real. He turned to the nearer guard. Seal the lower corridor. No staff punishments. No accounting marks. No records destroyed. Yes, Your Majesty. The guard ran. The order should have helped. Instead, my chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Seal the corridor. No one in. No one out. He had made the palace safer, and somehow all I could feel was the walls moving closer. The king looked back at me. You will stay here until I know who else is involved. Stay here. Stay where the light was too bright, where my sleeve was too thin, where the king's eyes had already seen enough to ruin me. I shook my head. I can't. You can. No, my voice cracked. You don't understand. Rooms like this don't protect people like me. They display us. I regretted it instantly. The guard nearest the door looked down. The king went still. For a moment, I thought I had insulted him badly enough to finally become the problem they had always said I was. But he only removed the dark cloak from his shoulders and laid it across the back of a chair, within my reach. Not on me. Not around me. Just there. A choice. Then take that if you want it, he said. Or don't. But no one will take you below tonight. The cloak looked too heavy, too royal, too impossible. I stared at it like it might bite. Kindness with conditions was familiar. Kindness without them had no shape I recognized. Before I could decide whether touching it would count as theft, a thin scream echoed from beyond the doors. Not loud. Not long. A servant trying not to be heard. My body moved before thought. This time the king did not block me. He opened the door himself. In the corridor, 2 young kitchen boys stood rigid against the wall, while a matron I knew from lower stores held a ledger tight against her chest. One boy had soap water dripping from his sleeves. The other had a red string tied around his thumb. My red string. A substitute mark. My stomach turned over. The matron froze when she saw the king. Then she dropped into a curtsy, so fast her knees hit the floor. Your Majesty, we were only preserving order. The king's voice was quiet. By marking children for another servant's correction? Not correction, she said quickly. Too quickly. Compliance review. The word struck the air like a second card. Compliance review. It sounded cleaner than punishment. Softer than bruises. It was the kind of phrase that could pass through polished halls without leaving blood on the marble. The kitchen boy with the string on his thumb kept his eyes on the floor. I knew that posture. I had worn it for years. Without thinking, I stepped forward and untied the string from his hand. My fingers shook so badly it took 3 tries. The boy looked up at me once, terrified and grateful, and that tiny look hurt worse than the bruises. The matron hissed under her breath. You are making this worse. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. The king heard it. Who ordered this? The matron's eyes flicked toward me, then away. The household has procedures. Who ordered this? He repeated. She clutched the ledger tighter. The king held out his hand. This time, she surrendered it at once. He opened it in the corridor, under the cold lamps, and page after page showed red marks, initials, times, substitutions. Not just mine. Other names. Other failures. Other little punishments were named until they looked like housekeeping. My name appeared more often than any other. Beside it were notes I had never seen. Sensitive. Suggestible. Accepts responsibility when prompted. Useful as example. The words blurred. I reached for the wall, but the king's cloak was suddenly in my hands. I did not remember taking it. Maybe I had. Maybe he had moved it closer and still not touched me. The cloth was warm from his shoulders. I hated how safe it felt. The king turned one more page, and there, beneath tonight's entry, was a list of signatures. Not only the stewards, the matrons, 2 supervisors, the healers, Mark, someone from household discipline, a whole chain of clean ink holding up the same dirty lie. I thought that was the full truth. I thought I finally understood. Then the king lifted the ledger closer to the light, and his thumb stopped on a column I had never noticed before. At the top of it were 3 words stamped over and over beside my name. Not punishment, not correction, royal behavioral conditioning. The first sign that the truth was worse than I understood was not the stamp itself. It was the way the guard stopped breathing when he saw it. He had faced the steward without blinking. He had taken the ledger from the matron with one hand on his sword. But the moment the words royal behavioral conditioning came into the light, his face went empty, trained into the careful blankness of a man who had just seen something dangerous enough to pretend he had not seen it at all. The king noticed. So did I. The corridors seemed to narrow around the ledger. The kitchen boys pressed closer to the wall. The matron's eyes dropped to the floor, but her mouth had gone tight with a look I knew too well. Not guilt. Fear of being caught obeying the wrong person too openly. The king turned the ledger toward her. What is this? She swallowed. An old classification, Your Majesty. Old classifications do not order midnight isolation. His thumb moved over the page. They do not mark children as substitutes. They do not describe a servant as useful as example. My skin went cold beneath his cloak. Useful as example. The words crawled under my sleeve and found every bruise. I had thought I was punished because I failed. Because I spilled. Because I spoke too softly, or too late, or too much. But useful was not a word for failure. Useful was a word for a tool. The king flipped back several pages, faster now, the controlled calm in his hands cracking into something sharper. Red strings shifted. Ink dates flashed by. My name appeared again and again, always beside the same stamped column. Behavioral conditioning. Compliance response. Responsibility acceptance. He stopped on a page from 3 years earlier. Subject responds to guilt prompts within 6 seconds, he read. My stomach lurched. I did not remember that card, not exactly. I remembered standing in the laundry passage with wet shoes. I remembered being asked why another boy had lost his supper ration. I remembered saying, because I distracted him, even though I had not. 6 seconds. Someone had counted. The king's voice dropped lower. Subject self-corrects when exposed to authority presence. The matron whispered, those notes were for internal improvement. Whose improvement? The question cracked through the corridor. No one answered. A guard moved to close the ledger, but the king's hand came down flat on the page. The sound made everyone flinch except him. Do not hide this from me. The guard bowed his head. Forgive me, Your Majesty. That stamp is Crown Office. The word struck harder than any shout. Crown Office. Not the steward's office. Not the kitchen. Not the lower household. The crown. The cloak around my shoulders suddenly felt heavy enough to crush me. I looked at the king before I could stop myself. He saw the change in my face, and something in his own broke open. I did not know, he said. I wanted to believe him. That was the terrible part. I wanted it so badly that it made me feel stupid. The matron lifted her head just enough to speak. No one said His Majesty knew personally. Personally. The word slipped between us like a blade. The king turned slowly toward her. Meaning? The matron's eyes flicked to the guards, to the boys, to me. She had already said too much, but fear made people careless. The program predates your reign. The corridor went silent. Even the warning bell below had stopped. The king looked back down at the ledger, and this time I saw what he saw. The first pages were older. Much older. The ink had browned at the edges. The handwriting changed, but the columns stayed the same. Behavioral conditioning. Compliance demonstration. Royal service suitability. My name was not on the earliest pages. Other names were. Some crossed out. Some marked transferred. One marked unfit after resistance. My throat closed around a sound I could not make. I had not been the first. I was only the one who had learned best. The king's fingers tightened on the ledger until the paper bent. This was never discipline, he said. The words were not for the matron. They were for me. But I could not look at him. My mind was running backward through years of little punishments, and every memory changed shape as it passed. The times they asked if I understood what I had done wrong. The times they waited in silence until I named a fault. The times someone else's discomfort ended only after I accepted blame. They had not been correcting me. They had been training me to make guilt easy for everyone around me. The matron tried to step back. Your Majesty, the lower household only maintained a tradition approved by prior authority. Approved for what purpose? The king asked it like he already knew the answer would be ugly. The matron said nothing. One of the kitchen boys began to cry silently. I heard the tiny hitch in his breath and hated that my body wanted to apologize for that too. Then the ledger gave up another piece of the truth. A loose sheet slid from between the pages and landed at the king's feet. It was not a card. It was a formal notice, folded twice, stamped in black wax instead of red string. The king picked it up. As he read, all the color left his face. He looked suddenly less like a monarch and more like a man standing at the edge of a grave he had not known carried his family name. Conditioned servants are to be placed near high-ranking guests, he read. Their visible submission stabilizes court hierarchy and discourages disorder among lower staff. My hands went numb inside the cloak. Visible submission. That was what I had been in the banquet hall. Not a waiter. Not an accident. A display. A bruised, apologizing warning dressed in white and placed beside a king to prove everyone else should stay afraid. I stepped back from him. The movement was small, but he felt it. No, he said softly. I am not part of this. The words hurt because they sounded like a plea. For the first time, the Alpha King was not the only power in the corridor. The truth stood between us, larger than both of us, wearing his crown even if he had never put it there. The matron saw it too. Her fear, twisted into something almost bold. With respect, Your Majesty, ending a royal program requires more than anger. These records implicate household officers, healers, auditors, and prior crown authority. If mishandled, the court will say you were misled by a damaged servant with a history of false confessions. There it was. The next cage. Not locked doors this time. A story prepared before I even spoke. I clutched the cloak tighter, ashamed of how much I still needed its warmth. The king looked at me then, not as if he expected forgiveness, but as if he understood he no longer had the right to ask for trust with words. He removed the royal signet from his hand and placed it on top of the ledger, pinning the loose notice beneath it. A public claim. A dangerous one. Then we do not mishandle it, he said. We expose it. My breath caught. The matron went pale. The guards straightened. Below us, another sound rose from the servants' corridor. Not a bell this time. Running footsteps. Shouts. Someone had realized the king had the ledger, and somewhere beneath the palace, the rest of the records were about to disappear. The king turned toward the stairwell, but I was already staring at the notice in black wax, at the phrase that had split my life in two. Visible submission. I thought the bruises had proved I deserved punishment. Now I understood something worse. They had been kept on me because they were useful. The first fire started below the stairs. I smelled it before anyone said the word. A sharp, bitter smoke that cut through the polished corridor and buried itself behind my teeth. The king moved first, one hand closing around the ledger, the other sweeping the black wax notice from beneath his signet. Records room, he ordered. The guards ran, but I was already cold because I knew the lower corridors better than they did. I knew how quickly paper burned in the laundry furnace. I knew which doors jammed when locked from the inside. I knew the servants who would stand aside if told that obedience was safer than truth. The matron saw my face and smiled for half a second. Not a kind smile. A relieved one. You see, she whispered. This is what happens when you make things difficult. My hand tightened around the king's cloak. The words hit the exact place they were meant to hit. The smoke, the running footsteps, the kitchen boy shaking against the wall, the guards shouting orders they could not yet enforce. All of it folded itself into one familiar sentence inside my skull. My fault. My fault. My fault. The king turned sharply, as if he had heard it. Do not listen to her. But he was too late. The thought had already gone in. The guard seized the matron, but she did not fight. She only raised her voice so the boys, the servants, the whole corridor could hear. If one unstable servant lies, an entire household falls with him. The kitchen boy whose thumb I had untied looked at me with sudden terror. Not disgust. Worse, fear of what my truth might cost him. That look did what the matron's words could not. It made me step back from the king. I should go below, I said. No. I can tell them I was confused. The king's face hardened. You will not. If I say I misunderstood, they may stop burning things. They may leave the others alone. And they will bury you with the ashes. His voice cracked through me, but the smoke was getting thicker, and below us someone screamed again. A real scream this time. Not from pain, maybe. From panic. From a door sealed too late, or opened too soon. The king looked toward the stairwell, torn between chasing the records and staying between me and a system that had already learned how to reach around him. That was the first time I saw his power fail to be simple. He could command guards. He could seize ledgers. He could frighten a matron into silence. But he could not be everywhere in a palace built to hide its sins in different rooms at the same time. He put the ledger into the nearest guard's hands. Take this to the royal chamber. Lock it under my seal. If anyone touches it, they answer to me. Then he looked at me. Not at my sleeve. Not at the bruises beneath it. At me. I need to go below. I knew what that meant. He was asking without asking. Stay here. Be safe. Let me fix what carries my crown's name. The old fear rose fast and ugly. If he left, the corridor would be full of people who knew exactly how to speak to me. If he stayed, the records might vanish. Either choice hurt someone. That was how they had trained me. They never gave me a door without placing another person behind it. Your Majesty, the guard said from the stairwell, returning breathless, face streaked with soot. The archive is locked from the furnace side. We can't get through without breaking the lower wall. Then break it. There's more. The guard held out a paper, half burned at one edge, snatched from somewhere below. It was folded like an official confession. My name sat at the top. My skin went numb before I read the rest. The king took it, scanned the page, and the silence that followed was worse than the smoke. He did not read it aloud at first. That told me enough. I reached for it. He did not hand it over. For the first time, he kept something from me. The hurt came so quickly it embarrassed me. Let me see. His jaw worked once. It is meant to harm you. Everything here is. He looked at me then, and whatever he saw on my face made him give me the paper. The handwriting was not mine, but the words were built from pieces of me. I confess that I exposed old injuries to gain royal sympathy. I confess that I exaggerated household discipline. I confess that I misled His Majesty due to emotional instability and resentment toward superiors. I stared at the sentences until they blurred. They had written the surrender before I had even known there was a war. At the bottom, a blank space waited for my signature. There was even a line for witnesses. The matron laughed once, softly. That document was circulated before the bell stopped ringing. By morning, the court will know he tried to manipulate the throne. The king moved toward her, but I caught his sleeve. I did not mean to. My fingers closed around the dark fabric before fear could stop them. He stopped instantly. That small obedience to my touch shattered something in me. No one had ever stopped because I asked without words. If you punish her now, I said, my voice barely holding together, they'll use it. They'll say I turned you against them. They'll say the confession is true. The king looked down at my hand on his sleeve, then at the paper shaking in my other hand. Then what do you want? The question should have been simple. It was not. Wanting was dangerous. Wanting left evidence. But the smoke was thickening, and below us the archive was burning, and in my hand was a confession designed to make me disappear while still breathing. For the first time that night, surviving quietly was no longer enough. I want the original records, I said. The words came out rough, unfamiliar, almost not mine. Not copies. Not cards they can explain away. The first orders. The names before mine. The proof that this started before me. The king's eyes changed. Not softer. Stronger. Then that is our objective. The word landed between us like a bridge I was terrified to cross. Another guard appeared at the stairwell, coughing hard. Your Majesty, they've sealed the old archive under Crown Office authority. We found a royal lock. The king went still. The guard swallowed. Only blood signet access can open it. The corridor turned toward him. Toward the ring he had placed on the ledger. Toward the crown that had protected the program before he ever knew its name. And for one terrible second, I understood the next trap. To reach the truth, I would have to walk with the Alpha King into the part of the palace where his own bloodline had taught mine to kneel. The royal lock opened before the king touched it. That was how we knew someone inside had been waiting for us. The old archive door stood at the bottom of the western stairwell, black iron sunk into stone, its surface marked with the same crown stamp I had seen beside my name. A thin line of light showed at the threshold, and smoke curled through it in a slow, deliberate ribbon. The guard beside us swore under his breath. The king lifted one hand, stopping him before he rushed forward. Too late. A paper slid out from beneath the door and landed at my feet. Not burned, not damaged, placed. My name was written across the front in clean black ink. The same false confession from before, but this time there was a signature at the bottom. Mine. My knees nearly gave. I didn't sign that, I whispered. The king picked it up, and for the first time since he had seen my wrist, doubt crossed his face. Not doubt in me. Doubt in what the palace was capable of making look true. The forged signature was not perfect, but it was close enough to frighten me. Close enough for people who wanted to believe it. Behind the iron door, a voice spoke through the crack. Calm. Educated. Not the steward. Not the matron. Someone higher. Your Majesty, the servant's confession has been filed. The matter is contained. Step away from the archive, and no further damage needs to be done. The king's face went still. Open the door. That would be improper without council witness. The voice paused. Especially given the possibility that your Majesty is under emotional influence from a conditioned subject. Conditioned subject. The words wrapped around my throat. Not servant. Not person. Subject. The king's hand tightened on the paper. You forged his name. We preserved the stability of the court. The guard raised his sword, but the king stopped him again. The wrong move would turn everything into exactly what they wanted. A violent king, a trembling servant, a locked archive full of secrets no one would ever verify. Then the voice behind the door changed direction and came for me. You know the language, don't you? You have always been good at accepting responsibility. Say the words, and the others will be spared. My body responded before I could think. My fingers found the edge of the king's cloak and twisted into the fabric. Say the words. That was all they ever needed. One sentence from me could make the smoke stop, the boys safe, the king innocent, the court calm. One sentence could put the cage back where everyone understood it. The king looked down at my hand. You do not have to answer them. I almost believed him. Then a second paper slid under the door. This one was a list. Names. The kitchen boys. The laundry staff. The guard who had carried the ledger. Even the healer whose mark appeared in the records. Beside each name was a charge. Conspiracy. Theft of royal documents. Disorder. Perjury. At the bottom, in red ink, one line weighted like a hook. Penalties suspended upon subject's reaffirmation of confession. My breath broke. They had found the one door I still could not close. Other people. Other punishments. The king read the list over my shoulder, and the anger in him went quiet enough to scare me. They are hostages, he said. No, the voice behind the door replied. They are consequences. The word hit me harder than a hand. Consequences had always been shaped like someone else suffering because I failed to be small enough. I stepped back from the king. His eyes caught mine immediately, but this time he did not tell me to stop. He saw the decision forming, and it hurt him before I made it. If I say I lied, I whispered, they release the others. Until the next time. There may not be a next time for them. There will always be a next time for someone if this survives. The truth of that sentence opened under me like a drop. I looked at the forged confession. My name looked obedient even when stolen. I hated that. I hated that they had learned my hand from years of incident cards, from signatures I had given after being told that refusing made me selfish. I hated that part of me still wanted to make this easy for them. A crash sounded behind the archive door. Then shouting. The guard moved, but the king had already taken back his signet ring from the sealed ledger box one of the men carried. He pressed it against the bloodlock plate. Nothing happened. The voice inside laughed softly. Prior Crown authority revoked direct access in cases involving behavioral assets. The archive opens for blood signet only with subject compliance. The words made no sense at first. Then the guard's face told me they made too much sense. My blood went cold. The lock did not just require the king. It required me to agree. Of course it did. Even the door had been built around my obedience. A thin needle slid from the center of the plate, bright under the lamp. The king stepped in front of it. No. I stared at the needle, then at the smoke curling above the door, then at the list of people waiting to be punished in my place. The open loop that had followed me my whole life finally narrowed into one cruel question. Would I give them my obedience one last time, or use it against them? I took the forged confession from the king's hand and tore it in half. The sound was small. The silence after it was not. Open it. The voice inside snapped, losing its calm. Sign, confess, and this ends. I looked at the king. He was ready to break the door, break the wall, break the whole lower palace if I asked him to. But if he did, they would say he forced me. They would say I was hidden behind him. They would say the bruised servant had needed a king to invent a truth for him. My fingers went to the clasp of his cloak. I unfastened it and let the dark fabric fall from my shoulders. The cold corridor air touched my sleeve, my wrist, the edge of the bruises I had spent years trying to erase from sight. The king's jaw tightened, but he did not cover me. He only stood beside me, not in front. Beside. I placed my hand near the needle and heard every voice that had ever taught me to apologize rise up inside my skull. Then, for the first time, I did not answer them. I looked at the king and said, "Don't hide them from me." I placed my wrist against the bloodlock before the king could stop me. The needle touched my skin, small and cold, and every muscle in his body went rigid beside me. "No," he said, but he did not grab me. He had heard what I asked. He had understood the difference between protection and another cage. I looked at the black iron door, at the forged confession torn in two at my feet, at the list of names they were holding over my head like a leash. "I consent to open the archive," I said, my voice shaking hard enough to break. "I do not consent to confess." The needle clicked. A bead of blood touched the plate. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the lock began to turn from inside the stone, gear after gear waking up like something ancient and ashamed. Behind the door, the calm voice cursed. Papers scraped. Someone shouted, "Burn the oldest orders first." The king's guard slammed forward as the iron door opened. Smoke rolled out, thick and gray. Inside, men in black. Court coats stood around a furnace built into the archive wall. One held a stack of folders over the open fire. Another had a sealing stamp in his hand. The man nearest the door turned, and I recognized him from 100 distant corridors. Lord Vere, senior officer of the crown household, the kind of man servants stepped around without knowing why. He looked at my uncovered wrist, then at the king, then at the bloodlock still closing behind us. His face changed only once. Not fear. Calculation. "Your Majesty," he said, lowering the folders as if he had not been about to destroy them. "You should not have brought the subject here." Subject. The word hit me, but it did not knock me down this time. The king stepped forward. I stepped with him. Not behind. Beside. Lord Vere saw it, and for the first time his calm cracked. The servant is conditioned for submission response. His statements are unreliable unless administered through proper review. He lifted the forged confession from the floor with 2 fingers. "This document clarifies the incident." "That is not my signature," I said. The words came out before the king could speak. Everyone looked at me. Guards. Officials. The 2 kitchen boys at the stairwell. The matron, pale between 2 soldiers. My voice was small compared to the stone room, but it was mine. Lord Vere's eyes sharpened. "You are distressed. You have been influenced." "Yes," I said. His mouth almost smiled. Then I looked at the furnace, at the half-burned folders, at the cards tied in red string on the archive table. "By you." The silence broke open. Lord Vere moved too quickly toward me. The king's growl stopped him like a blade at the throat, but I raised my hand before the king could do more. My sleeve had fallen back. The bruises were visible now, ugly under the archive lamps, no longer hidden by white cloth or apology. I wanted to cover them so badly my fingers twitched. I did not. "You wrote that I bruise easily," I said. "You wrote that I cry to manipulate people. You wrote that I accept responsibility when prompted." My eyes found the folders near the furnace. "You counted the seconds." One of the guards pulled the folders from the official's hands and opened them across the stone table. Pages slid out. Old orders. Charts. Names. Mine. Others. Beside my name were response notes, correction dates, recommended phrases. Ask if subject caused inconvenience. Prompt guilt by mentioning substitute penalties. Reinforce responsibility before sleep deprivation. The room blurred, but I kept standing. The king's hand hovered near mine, not touching, ready if I asked. I did not ask yet. Lord Vere's voice cooled. "These measures maintained palace order for decades. Lower staff require visible hierarchy. Your Majesty's predecessors understood that." The king said, "My predecessors are not standing here." "No," Lord Vere replied. "A bruised servant is." He turned to the guards, to the watching staff, to everyone with fear in their faces. "Look at him. He will say anything to stop discomfort. That is the design. His obedience is proof the program worked." Something inside me went quiet. Not calm. Clear. For years, I had thought the worst thing was being hurt. It was not. The worst thing was that they had made my pain useful, then called my obedience proof that I deserved it. I reached for the nearest stack of red string cards. My hand shook as I lifted them, but I did not drop them. These are not confessions, I said. They are not discipline records. They are instructions for how to make me blame myself. Lord Vere stepped closer. You will regret this. The old fear answered first. My stomach folded. My mouth remembered the shape of an apology. The words rose on their own. I opened my lips. The king went still beside me, waiting, letting the choice remain mine. I looked down at the bruises on my wrist. Finger marks. Not failure marks. Not proof of weakness. Proof that someone had held too tightly and called it order. I looked back at Lord Vere. It was not my fault. The words were not loud, but they changed the room. The kitchen boy began to cry openly. One guard bowed his head. The matron looked away. Lord Vere's face hardened. Say that again under formal witness, and you condemn every officer who followed lawful procedure. Then witness it, the king said. His voice carried into the stairwell, down the corridor, into every place the palace had taught people to whisper. All of you. But he did not speak for me after that. I did. I raised my wrist, not high, just enough that no one could pretend not to see. These bruises were not self-inflicted. I did not expose them to gain sympathy. I hid them because I was told other people would suffer if I didn't. I signed cards because I was afraid. I accepted blame because you trained me to. And I am done making your cruelty easier to file. Lord Vere lunged for the records. The guards seized him before he reached the table. The sealing stamp fell from his hand and cracked against the stone. The sound was small, final, almost disappointing. A system that had felt endless broke with the noise of metal splitting on the floor. The king placed his signet on the original orders, pressing his blood-warmed ring into black wax over the words that had owned me. By direct royal witness, he said, these records are seized. All officers named are suspended under guard. All substitute penalties are void. No servant will be punished for testimony given tonight. Lord Vere was dragged past me, his eyes burning with the promise of ruin he no longer controlled. You think this frees you? He said. You were made to kneel. I looked at him, then at the torn confession, then at the bruises I still had not covered. My knees were shaking. My chest hurt. I did not feel free. Not yet. But when the apology rose again, I let it die behind my teeth. The king stood beside me in the smoke and wreckage of the archive, not touching me, not hiding me, while everyone stared at the marks I had spent my life making invisible. The truth was out. The records were saved. The men who had named my pain were in chains. And still, when I looked down at my wrist, some wounded part of me waited to feel guilty for surviving. By dawn, the palace had stopped ringing bells and started opening doors. That was the first consequence I could understand. Not justice, not freedom, not healing. Doors. The lower corridors that had always swallowed servants whole stood wide beneath royal guard, their locks broken, their record drawers carried into the light one by one. Red strings were cut from incident cards and placed in a bowl at the center of the servants' hall, where everyone could see them become nothing more than thread. Lord Vere and the officers named in the old archive were taken under seal before the court woke. The steward did not look at me when they brought him past. The matron did, but her eyes no longer had the power to make my spine fold. The king's order was read aloud in the same corridor where I had once been counted absent, late, improper, unstable. All correction records suspended. All substitute penalties void. All testimony protected. All servants bearing marks from household discipline to be examined by healers who answered directly to the crown, not the lower office. People cried when they heard that. Some quietly. Some like they had been holding their breath for years and had finally been told breathing was not disorder. I stood near the back with the king's cloak folded over my arm instead of around my shoulders. I did not know why I carried it. Maybe because giving it back felt like admitting I no longer needed it, and needing it still felt shameful. The Alpha King noticed, of course. He noticed everything, but he did not ask for it. He only stood beside the long table where the ledgers had been laid open, signing order after order until black wax covered the names that had once covered us. When he was finished, he turned to me in front of everyone and bowed his head. Not deeply, not theatrically, just enough to make the room go still. The crown failed you, he said. My first instinct was to save him from the words. To say no, to say it was complicated, to say I should have spoken sooner, obeyed better, bruised less visibly. The old sentence rose inside me like a trained dog returning to its master. It was my fault. I felt it reach my tongue. Then I looked at the bowl of red string. I looked at the kitchen boy whose thumb I had untied, now standing with both hands free. I looked at the healer's mark on the seized records, at the forged confession torn and sealed as evidence, at my own wrist uncovered beneath the torn cuff of my white serving jacket. The bruises were still there. They had not vanished because someone believed me. They had not softened because the men who wrote them down were locked away. Healing, I realized, was not a door opening once. It was choosing not to crawl back into the cell because the hallway still scared you. Yes, I said. My voice shook, but it did not disappear. It did. A murmur moved through the servants' hall. The king accepted the answer without flinching. That was when I began to trust him in a way that had nothing to do with power. He did not need my forgiveness to make himself feel clean. He did not ask my pain to become proof of his goodness. He only placed the next sealed order on the table and said, "Then the crown will answer for it." Later, when the hall emptied and the first gray light of morning touched the high windows, I found myself standing beside the same banquet table where everything had begun. The spilled water was gone. The goblet had been removed. Only one thing remained: the black incident card from last night, preserved under glass with the forged confession and the original midnight order. Visible marks exposed before royal guest. If questioned, servant will confess self-inflicted injury. I stared at the words until they lost their teeth. The king stood several feet away, close enough that I was not alone, far enough that my fear had room to breathe. "Do you want it destroyed?" he asked. I thought I would. I thought watching it burn would feel like victory. But the card had already survived the fire below. So had I. "No," I said. "Keep it." He looked at me, waiting, not as proof that I failed. My fingers touched the glass, as proof that they knew. The king's face softened, and this time the softness did not frighten me. He reached out halfway, then stopped. A question without words. My hand trembled once before I placed it in his. His palm was warm, steady, careful around the bruises. He did not squeeze. He did not claim. He simply held what I chose to give him. For years, hands had meant correction, control, a warning tightening before pain. This hand felt like a promise with no lock on it. Outside the windows, the palace woke to a different kind of silence. Not the silence of fear. The silence after a storm, when people step outside and realize the roof is damaged, the ground is flooded, but the sky is still there. I looked down at my sleeve. The fabric was wrinkled, stained with smoke, torn where I had pulled it back at the archive door. My fingers moved toward it by habit. Cover the mark. Smooth the cloth. Make it easier for others to look at me. The king's hand did not tighten. He did not stop me. That mattered. The choice was mine. I let my hand fall. The bruises remained in the morning light, ugly and fading, no longer hidden beneath white fabric, no longer carrying a shame that had never belonged to me. I had thought I deserved them until the Alpha King saw them, but in the end, the person who had to truly see them was me.